And many will argue that to meet climate goals, the government is going to urge us to fly less. Despite this, last week's budget, as you'll remember, announced a cut on aviation tax for short-haul domestic flights. Ahead of a key climate summit, is this the right signal to send right now, do you think? Let's talk to Todd Smith, aviation and climate expert, who gave up his job as a pilot after being made aware of the climate problem and joins us right now. Hello, Todd. Good morning.
Hello, Vanessa. Good morning.
So is this true? You used to be a pilot and then you thought it wasn't commensurate with the future of the planet to carry on earning a living as a pilot, so you stopped?
Not as heroic as that, unfortunately. I used to fly for Thomas Cook, and given that I grew up in a working class family, and that's something I always wanted to do since my earliest memories. I actually had my medical revoked about 3.5 years ago.
Yeah.
One of the reasons was a diagnosis of Lyme disease, which has become much more prevalent due to our milder winters and our warmer summers. So I've recovered from that now, but I'm actually struggling with my mental health. I suffer from eco-anxiety, which is like an understanding of mainstream science and seeing our leaders go in the opposite direction. I've got to
say, this is the first mention ever that I've heard either on the programme or in my real life or in the newspaper or really anywhere else of this thing that you've just said, eco-anxiety. So tell us a little bit about eco-anxiety. What is it like if you suffer from that?
Well, firstly, there's a report in the Lancet, and there was 10,000 young people from 15 to 25 surveyed, and 60% said that they're extremely or very worried about their futures, and just 30% believe that their governments are taking enough action. So,
do you mind my asking how old you are?
Yeah, sure. I'm 32 now.
You're 32, okay.
Yeah.
And what kind of impact does it have on your ability to have fun, sleep well, eat well, fall in love, do all the things that people want to do in life? Are you able to do all those things, or are you so full of anxiety you can't do them?
To be honest, it's all encompassing. I spent the last 2 years studying climate change and really trying to understand why people like the people in Extinction Rebellion were taken to the streets and going to such extreme lengths. And, the more I learn and the more I learn about my industry and what a huge part my industry played in this crisis, I can't switch it off. Like with most, if you get a fight or flight response, generally as a human, we can do either one of those things, but we can't fight climate change effectively. I'm trying to do all that I can, literally, to make a difference, and it just seems to get drowned out in the noise. So
what does that mean? Does that mean you're just so worried the whole time that you can't relax and you can't enjoy anything?
Well, there's brief periods, of course, Vanessa, and I have to switch off sometimes for self-preservation. But it's just it's not long before I read another news report about heat domes in North America, 5 degrees above normal, the previous record, or 38 degrees in the Arctic, or the lack of ice. We're going to have an Arctic-free
and when you think about this, are you fearful primarily for yourself? You think, oh my God, I'm not going to be able to breathe, I'm not going to be able to have enough food, I'm not going to be able to something, or is it you're fearful for future generations you don't know and will never know? I mean, what's the actual fear? Because even the scariest headline today is not saying, by next week we're all going to be in the deepest trouble. That's not what it's saying. The idea that we've got to get on with it. The time's running out and all that is frightening. I absolutely agree with you. But we have time still, don't we? And we don't all have to go into a massive panic free fall, or do you feel we should be?
I think eco-anxiety will hit everyone eventually. It's just a case of when. I think a lot of people are not really connecting to what's happening, and the reality is this is already as bad as it can get. Half of the world's children, that's 1 billion children, are living in countries already considered extremely high risk from climate change. And, this is just the very beginning. This is the most stable and the least extreme period for the next 100 generations, potentially. Sir David King, the former scientific advisor, says what we do in the next 3 or 4 years will determine the future of humanity. And then our government's talking about 2050 and net zero, and we're actually forecast. All of the countries submitted their NDCs before COP, and we need a 45% reduction according to the IPCC to stay below 1.5 degrees, and we're going to have a 16% increase, Vanessa. We're literally going in the wrong direction.
So tell me about the airline industry. They're one that you used to be a part of as a pilot, and the contribution that this is making as far as you're concerned to climate change and global warming, and also what you think should happen as a result of it. Because I don't imagine you're thinking all aeroplanes should be permanently grounded and none should ever leave any airport in the world. I don't suppose that's what you want, or maybe it is it?
No, not at all. I
No.
mean, I love aviation. Obviously, I'm passionate about it, and I wish I could return to the sector, but it needs to take its commitments seriously, as do all sectors. And the reality is, in 2019, we flew 4 billion passengers globally. Obviously, there's only less than 8 billion people on this planet, so over 80% of the world's population never even stepped foot on an aircraft. So we've already got an industry which is more than big enough. The UK Climate Assembly, the government's own advisors at the CCC have said that we need demand management, and the government has this Jet Zero proposal, and they're not considering demand management at all. They're just continuing. They just want to continue with business as usual. And we need to bear in mind that it's not like the ordinary person that saves up their hard-earned cash for that one flight, abroad each year. There's 1% of the population creating 50% of aviation emissions. So, we've got a small polluting elite which are doing most damage.
I mean, obviously,
us,
most of the COP26 delegates have flown in, haven't they, on various aircraft from all over the world.
I mean, to be honest, when it comes to COP26, this should have been the most important summit, but with the contributions that are already submitted beforehand, we're going to go through 1.5 degrees. That's catastrophic. It's already bad enough at 1.2 where we are now. So I do think it's important for every country to have a seat at that table, and if they need to fly there, then I fully support that. But it's about categorizing flights into what's necessary. And, like corporations taking responsibility. If they've got video conferencing software, like Microsoft, they're one of the biggest corporate flyers, but they've got their own video conferencing software, or, just the frequent flyers. So there's demand management measures. For instance, kerosene, aviation fuel, is completely tax-free. And if we tax that money, we could raise, I believe, 7 or 8 billion in the UK, and that money could be used for insulation of housing, making rail and public transport cheaper. So, the government, I don't understand what they're doing, but they're not doing much.
What did you think of the latest cut in aviation tax for short-haul domestic flights? I mean, that was a way of revving up the airline industry and getting people back on planes instead of trains or cars. What did you think of that?
Well, it just is the complete opposite direction. In France now, they've banned domestic travel flights below, if it's below 2.5 hours and there's a suitable rail alternative. The International Energy Agency, which is a really conservative body, say we need to cap long haul growth, and domestic flights.
So effectively, if France were here, you wouldn't be able to take a plane from London to Manchester, for example, would you? You'd have to get on the train or go in the car to get there.
Yeah.
But we're not doing that. We're doing the opposite. We're giving
Yeah.
tax subsidies to short-haul domestic flights. So we're doing the exact opposite while co-hosting, while hosting, COP26, and being very annoyed with France about the fishing situation. Todd, thank you very much indeed for joining us. I do hope that your eco-anxiety, to some extent, relaxes to give you the situation in life where you can at least enjoy life as we're living it, rather than be so tormented and tortured. I'm very sorry to hear about, what you're going through with it, because it does sound like a terrible trial, kind of hanging over you. Is it possible to get treatment for something like that? Has he gone? He's gone. All right. Well, I wish him well anyway. It's the first time I've had any contributor on the programme talk about eco-anxiety. And maybe when you heard him say that, you thought, well, I've got that. I know exactly what that is. Maybe you can't imagine how anybody can be calm and cool and funny and jovial and convivial and having a laugh and being lighthearted and whizzing around the place, just ignoring all the things that are going on and going wrong with the planet. Maybe you are absolutely, just like Todd, weighed down with anxiety and worry and fear on a daily, hourly basis. You just can't forget it. It just hangs over all you do. It informs all your choices, all your thoughts. It stops you sleeping at night. Eco-anxiety. It's the first time I've had a guest say that they are suffering from that on the programme. He said, I've got issues with mental health. And normally when people say that, they go on to talk about depression or they go on to talk about something related to that. They don't usually say eco-anxiety. So taking calls on that too, if you want to ring about that, 0800 731 2000. And joining us on the programme, Dan in High Wycombe. Hello, Dan. Good morning. Thanks a lot for ringing.
Hi, Vanessa. Thanks very much for having me on.
That's a pleasure. So when you heard our pilot guest talk about having what he said was eco-anxiety, and I said it's the first time anyone's ever said that on the programme, you felt that you were suffering from the same thing.
Well, in a sense, yeah. I suppose I think the thing with all these, anything that's such a sort of significant, almost overwhelming sort of factor or whatever we want to call it is. I think we all experience in different ways, right? So once you truly engage with the gravity of what's going on, especially when, like myself, relatively recently become a parent over the last few years.
Yeah.
I think if you really openly, try and take away the filter that we look through the world, all the conditioning that we've been exposed to, all the things that we think we need, all the stuff that we think is normal. We just ask ourselves, what do I really think, right? What do I really think?
Yeah.
And as a parent and as a human being, it is very scary. And I think to an extent, if anyone who stops and does that will be affected by that, but we all get affected by it in different ways.
And how has this affected you, do you think?
Well, it led me also I was also an airline pilot, and in fact, yesterday was my last day of employment. I chose to leave. 10 years into a 40-year career, I also chose to stop flying airplanes for a living for exactly the same reason.
Wow. Because, it's very hard indeed and a huge achievement to become a pilot, isn't it? So many people who dream of becoming a pilot don't make it. And having made it, it would denote such a passion for what you do, not to mention such a skill and such a talent and everything else. And to walk away from that, that's a hugely big deal, isn't it?
It's massive.
Yes.
And there's the financial element to it. There's all the things you mentioned. But for me, I wanted to fly since I was 6 years old. I was the third generation of pilots in my family. I went through an awful lot to get there. And but it got to a point where the conflict, and it's not me expecting that, me leaving the profession is going to directly stop the problem. Of course, someone else is going to step in and the flight's still going to go. But for me, the conflict was too significant. And all the things that Todd said about why the industry is failing to act in a way which is consistent with the overwhelming scientific consensus.
Yeah.
And as a parent, how can you not ignore that? And even though, and I think one of the previous callers one of the previous callers was saying, I might be more anxious if it was affecting me, but the reality is, if we've got 1 billion children in the world who are currently, 1 billion children, I'm a parent.
Yes.
There's 1 billion children in this planet who are currently at risk. And I say at risk, in fact, we're talking significant risk because of famine, because of water shortages, because of excess heat. Who are, how can a parent hear that and not feel concerned? And how, for many people, is that almost inevitably going to lead to some form of anxiety? Now, for some, that might be sort of overwhelming and life-changing. For some, it might be fleeting, but it's going to cause some reaction.
Do you find it surprising or even shocking that not everyone appears to share your acute state of involvement, concern, perturbation, you might say, about all of this? That most people, I say the overwhelming majority of people, think about it sometimes, pay lip service to it a bit of the time, and most of the time don't think about it at all. A little bit like when the pandemic struck, and some people were absolutely terrified of dying. They saw that Nightingale Hospital being built in London and thought, Jesus, I don't want to be one of those 3,000 intensive care patients, and felt absolute panic. And other people just didn't. Some people felt, well, I don't think it's going to be me. I'm sure I'm going to be okay. This bizarrely kind of gung-ho, totally nonchalant kind of attitude to a world global pandemic. Do you feel as if people don't get it? They don't understand what you understand?
Absolutely. I think, in answer to the first part of your question, is yes. For me, it's yes and no. It's right now, based upon the lens I now look through, I find it hard to imagine how other people cannot, see the significance of what's going on. But I've also got to bear in mind that only 4, maybe 5 years ago, I wasn't thinking about it much myself. And it wasn't, and I don't know exactly what suddenly, the way I think about it is, I think a lot about the cognitive side of it, whether it's our cognitive biases or our cognitive dissonance. At some point in time, it was almost like the barriers just came down, and I didn't have that dissonance and all the forms of bias that were affecting me. When I say bias, what I mean is I had biases that I had every reason to want to believe it was okay to keep flying in the way we were.
Yeah, of course.
I love doing
more
it.
than anyone else I've ever spoken to.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, Dan! Listen, we may revisit you and talk to you again on the show another day if you don't mind. I wouldn't mind you reviewing some papers for us if you're in the mood for that. Do you mind sticking on the line and just having a chat to my producer, and we'll maybe be lucky enough to talk to you again while I move on to a completely different subject. Dan, thank you very much indeed.